Here's something that should bother you. Right now, your brain is processing light, translating sound, generating a sense of time passing. Scientists can measure all of it. They can watch the neurons fire. They can trace the chemicals. They can map the exact biological sequence of you reading these words. But there is one thing, one single thing, that science cannot explain. Why any of that produces you. Not your brain, not your body. You. The thing that is experiencing this. The voice in your head, right now. The feeling of being here. That feeling has no scientific explanation, and it never has. In 1994, a philosopher named David Chalmers stood up at a conference in Arizona and said something that made an entire room of scientists uncomfortable. He said there were two kinds of problems in understanding the human mind. The easy problems, things like how we process vision, store memory, control attention, hard, technically, but solvable. Give science enough time and tools, and it will figure them out. Then there was the other kind. He called it the hard problem. Not hard as in difficult, hard as in categorically different. A problem that doesn't just resist answers, it resists the very framework we use to ask questions. The hard problem of consciousness. Why does physical matter, neurons, synapses, electrical signals, produce subjective experience? Why is there something it feels like to be you? The room was quiet, because the truth was, nobody had an answer. Not even close. And decades later, they still don't. Here's what makes this strange. We have solved almost everything else about the brain. We can trigger specific memories using electrodes. We can predict decisions before people are consciously aware they've made them. We can chemically alter personality, suppress fear, manufacture joy. We understand the machinery, but the machinery shouldn't feel like anything. Think about your phone. It processes information. It responds to inputs. It even learns. But there is nothing it feels like to be your phone. There is no experience happening inside it. There is no inner world. And here is where it gets disturbing. We have no scientific reason, none, to believe you are any different. The atoms in your brain follow the same physical laws as the atoms in a rock. Chemistry doesn't have feelings. Electricity doesn't have feelings. And yet, somewhere in the biological process happening inside your skull right now, something is experiencing all of this. Something is you. But that's not the worst part. Here is a thought experiment that has haunted philosophers for 50 years. Imagine I build a copy of you. Not a rough copy, a perfect one. Every atom in exactly the right place. Every neuron configured identically. Every memory, every habit, every preference, reproduced without a single error. Physically, there is no difference. Now, is that copy conscious? Does it feel anything? You would probably say yes, of course it does. It's a perfect copy. But here is the problem. You cannot know that. Not from the outside, not from any scan or test or measurement. Because consciousness, actual subjective experience, is invisible to science. It leaves no physical trace. You cannot look at a brain and find the place where experience lives. Which means something even stranger is true. You cannot prove I am conscious. You cannot prove anyone around you is conscious. You take it on faith. Every single day. You assume the people you love have an inner world because they behave like they do. Because they tell you they do. But you have never, not once, had direct access to another person's experience. You have only ever experienced your own. Philosophers have a name for this. The philosophical zombie. A being physically identical to a human in every measurable way. But with nothing going on inside. No experience. No feelings. No inner voice. Just behavior. Just the appearance of consciousness with nothing behind it. The disturbing implication isn't whether zombies could exist, it's that you could be surrounded by them right now and you would never know. And here is what makes serious neuroscientists lose sleep. There is currently no test that distinguishes a conscious being from a perfect, unconscious imitation of one. None. But let's go deeper, because the problem doesn't stop with other people. In 1641, René Descartes decided to destroy everything he believed. Not because he was in crisis, but as a philosophical experiment. He wanted to find one single thing he could know with absolute certainty. so he stripped everything away. He couldn't trust his senses. They'd deceived him before. He couldn't trust his memories. They could be fabricated. He couldn't even fully trust that the world existed. Maybe it was all a very convincing illusion. And then he found it. The one thing that couldn't be doubted. The act of doubting itself. I think, therefore I am. It sounded like a solution, but it wasn't. Because notice what it actually proves. It proves that thinking is happening. It proves experience exists. But it tells you almost nothing about what is doing the experiencing. It tells you nothing about whether your perception of reality is accurate. It tells you nothing about whether the you that woke up this morning is the same you from yesterday, or just a continuation that feels continuous. Descartes thought he'd found the floor. He'd found a raft in the middle of an ocean. Every night you lose consciousness, and every morning something wakes up. It has your memories, your voice, your face in the mirror. It picks up exactly where you left off. But is it you? Neuroscience tells us that the self, this continuous narrative of being one person through time, is something the brain constructs. Actively, moment by moment. It isn't discovered, it's manufactured. The feeling of being the same person you were 10 years ago is a story your brain tells to make sense of the present. Which means the you reading this is, in a real and measurable sense, not the same entity that existed when you were 5 years old. The atoms have been replaced. The neural pathways have been rewired. The beliefs, the fears, the memories, all edited, compressed, partially invented. You are, at best, a sequel. And there is no scientific consensus on whether the original was ever real in the first place. Here is what we are actually left with. The universe spent 13.8 billion years assembling matter. Stars exploded, galaxies formed, planets cooled, cells divided, animals evolved, nervous systems grew complex enough to fold back on themselves and ask questions. And the strangest question of all, the one that emerges only when the complexity gets high enough, is this. What is it like to be this? That question only gets asked because something is experiencing the asking. But where that experience comes from, why matter becomes aware of itself, why the lights turn on inside a human skull and not inside a star or a stone or a circuit board. Science has no answer, not a partial answer, not a working theory everyone agrees on. No answer. The most important fact about your existence, the fact that and this is the part almost nobody sits with. We walk around every day completely certain that we're here, that we're real, that our experience matters. We make decisions based on feelings we assume are genuine. We build relationships with people we assume are conscious. We fear death because we assume there's something here to lose. But all of that certainty, every last bit of it, rests on a foundation that science cannot verify. Not because science hasn't tried, because the tools science uses to measure reality are themselves part of the very thing it's trying to explain. You cannot stand outside consciousness to study it. There is no outside, there is only this. This moment. This strange, unproven, unrepeatable experience of being you, reading this, in a universe that somehow became aware of itself and has no idea why. The question isn't whether science will eventually solve this. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. The question is what it means that the most fundamental fact about you, the fact that you are experiencing anything at all, is the one thing in the universe that nothing and no one has ever been able to explain. You are, by every rigorous scientific standard, unproven. And somehow, impossibly, you are still here. You exist as an experiencing being, is, to our best science, completely unexplained.